Alright, just needed to fix that problem. My apologies, guys. Thank you guys for tuning back into the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Nelson, and we are going to be doing 3 segments today. We are going to pick back up on the previous segment where we talked about what the matchups of the week were going to be, where we talked about how Wemby was going to go up against Chet in a very anticipated matchup. That will be our first segment. We will also be looking at Devin Booker being able to outplay Luka Doncic as the Suns went up against the Mavericks in a huge win, and Luka getting mad at a fan and ending up kicking him out, as well as an update to as what happened to the rest of the games, as well as Golden State playing their first game after their assistant coach died. We also have a fourth segment to the show, so stick around to figure out exactly what that is. I ask that you remember to follow and subscribe to the show. If you want to become a member or part of the show, there is a link in the description. And as always, please remember to tip and donate to get your comments recognized. The link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Helps makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Once again, the link is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. As displayed in the link in the description and also right below the ticker on every single display. So with that in mind, let us begin. Actually, before we begin with that segment, there was just recent news on a trade rumor going around surrounding Zach LaVine and the Detroit Pistons. So as of right now, the Bulls have been in trade discussions with Pistons offering Zach LaVine in return for Bojan Bogdanovic and either one of these stars, Cade Cunningham, Sir Thompson, Jaden Ivey, and Jalen Duren. So it's Bojan and one of those four that are going to end up in Chicago, and in exchange for LaVine ending up in Detroit. Now, obviously, this is, in my opinion, if they allow Cade to go and they take LaVine, I feel like that is a huge win for the Bulls if the Bulls end up getting Cade from this trade. Cade from this trade. It's funny. But anyways, I don't think they would send away Cade or Asur, even though that would be a really huge win, even though I think personally Cade would be a much bigger win for the Bulls, seeing as like they would need a scorer, and Cade is that really good scorer and that really good playmaker. As I mentioned in the previous podcast before, Zach LaVine is one of the most highly anticipated guards on the trade block right now, and he's been in a lot of trade rumors and a lot of trade talks. I think this one is legitimate, and the trade offer, like what the pieces that they are offering in exchange for what they're getting, is pretty solid. So, and the fact that they're offering them a choice is very interesting because I've never seen teams really do that in a trade offer. Like, usually it's either they have like a set of players that they definitely want and they pick those players. It's not like all the time that a team that's trading away their players gets to choose which player they get to trade. So that might actually hurt like emotionally for some of these players, because if it's like Jaden Ivey or Jalen Duren or Asur, my bad. They're just like, damn, like these guys, this team didn't want me, like, and that might affect them mentally towards the game. Who knows how these trades go? So if this trade goes through the way how I think it's going to go through, where they either trade Asur or maybe Jaden Ivey, maybe Jalen Duren, something like that, because I don't think they're going to trade away Cade, we might see a Zach LaVine and Cade Cunningham backcourt in Detroit. which would be something that Detroit would definitely need now in this time. Because right now, the only thing going for Detroit is the Lions, which is crazy to say now in this day and age. But let's get back to the main segment, which was the highly anticipated matchup of Victor Wembanyama against Chet Holmgren. Now, as I mentioned before in the previous podcast, the matchup between these two was highly anticipated. I also mentioned that I felt that Wemby was going to win this battle in terms of just counting stats. I didn't think he was going to win the game in the end because of how good OKC really is. So I definitely felt like that team aspect of basketball that a lot of people forget was going to kick in, and I did say that Wemby was going to outplay Chet, and I was right on all of the things that I said in my recent podcast. So yay me! But Wemby ended the game with 24 and 12 compared to Chet's 17 and 9. But Chet outplayed him in the efficiency battle like he always does. And that's the story between the two of them. It's total stats going against efficiency stats every single time. And on top of that, the fact that Chet is able to win most of the games when he goes head to head against Wemby. The matchup might not be close between the scoreboard, but the two rookies didn't care about the score, and they continued to go blow for blow and provided some good offense, some great highlights. There was this one play where Chet, he hits a three in Wemby's face, this one possession, and then Wemby comes right back and then goes at Chet's chest and then dunks the ball. So, obviously, they were going back and forth. Great matchup. Can't wait to see those two continue to play for years and years since they are very young. Victor is right now 0-4 when facing against Chet in head-to-head matchups for his entire career, which again begs to question what determines exactly who wins in a matchup. Now, I'll break that down for all those people that don't know what I'm talking about. So essentially, basketball is obviously it's a team sport, but there's still instances where one individual player can outplay the other player at a specific position. Even though it's a team sport, one player could outplay that player and could still have the upper hand in talking points, I guess you could say. And for example, if Joel Embiid were to drop 57 on a center, regardless if he wins or lose, he could just say, I've dropped 57 on you. And that's really embarrassing. You might not have won the game, but or you might have won the game, but having 57 on your head is really embarrassing. At least from a I feel like from any standpoint, having a bunch of points drops on your head is just unacceptable. It depends. Obviously, it depends on how the points are dropped, but still, 50 is a lot of points. If you lose a game, but you outplay your opponent, do you technically do you win? Do you win that matchup? I mean, I guess it depends on how much better the player outplayed the other player, and the argument for being better than the opposing player, especially if you outplay and you win them. But when Embiid always outplays Jokic and ends up winning the games, not many people are quick to say Embiid is better than Jokic, despite the clear evidence to Joel Embiid winning the matchups against Jokic and winning the games against Jokic. Despite that clear evidence, everyone is going to say that Nikola Jokic is a better player than Joel Embiid. But it's there's clear evidence, so it's why are we not giving Joel Embiid this credit that he obviously deserves? So, while the game might have sounded like Wemby versus Chet, it wasn't really just Wemby versus Chet. There was also Shai, who had a great game, scoring 32 points and getting 10 assists. as well. Obviously, while Chet didn't put up the better numbers, it's not like his numbers weren't impactful. I'm not going to say that his numbers weren't impactful. That's not the type of person I am. I feel like a lot of Chet's fans, however, give him a little bit too much credit for those impactful points and impactful wins and don't look at the stats as a whole. So, obviously, part of the game is looking at who gives your team the important buckets, but the other part of the game is who gives your team buckets. If at the end of the game you look at the box score and the player ended with 12 points, but he had 10 important points, did he really play better than the guy who had 24 points but had like 4 important points? Probably not. So when I say important points, I say points that directly impact a game's trajectory, by the way. So mainly points scored when the game is close. Judging by a performance only when the game is close is like looking at the glass half full, and it doesn't always tell you the whole story. So a lot of people are shifting the talk about Chet making this win possible with the scoring and his presence under the rim. When you look at the box score and somebody else on your team ended up with 32 points, but you're getting all the talk, it's like doesn't really make much sense. Not to mention how there's also a lot of talk that Chet and Victor, how a lot of Chet fans would argue that Chet outplayed Victor and would argue that his box score is a clear-cut reason, Chet having a plus 11 box score while Victor had a minus 11 box score. So that's more context as to why they believe that that's more context as to why Chet deserves Rookie of the Year, even though that doesn't tell the entire story. And the supporting argument, once again, for Chet is his efficiency and the fact that he's won every single matchup against Victor Wembanyama. But once again, context is required when you're talking about box plus minus. Now, it might be an individual stat, but it is indirectly a team stat. When you're comparing players, at least, it's a team stat. And when they play in different scenarios, that's definitely a team stat. If your team is, let's say, like really bad, you're on a team that's really bad, you're in the rotation, your box plus minus is going to be bad because your team is losing, and you are on the floor all the time when your team is losing. Like, look at Jordan Poole and Kyle Kuzma. Like, those guys used to have positive box plus minus scores, but now they have negative box plus minus scores rather than having the positive ones. And despite like some of their scoring performances being similar to each other, and despite putting up similar numbers throughout the years, so if you're on a good team and you have a good starting lineup and you play with the starting lineup and you're in the starting lineup most of the time, you probably have a good box plus minus, because if you're winning a lot, you're scoring more than the other team. So naturally, since Oklahoma City has a better record, they naturally have a better team, which means they naturally produce better box plus minuses. They'd be outscoring the Spurs. I mean, like, if you were to think about it from, like, the number one seed in the Western Conference against literally the worst seed in the Western Conference, you would think that the number one seed would score a lot more points. And at the same time, Chet is being in the starting lineup, while at the same time, Wembanyama is on the starting lineup that is bad. It's a little bit unfair to judge the two of them just off of box plus minuses alone. Not to mention, there were some plays where Chet wasn't even guarding Victor, while Victor stayed glued to him the entire time. So it really shows how much more of a man Victor Wembanyama is than Chet. He's able to stick to him like glue. I mean, just looking at the numbers, you could see that Victor had the better game. It's just OKC is just clearly the better team. This shouldn't be taken into like any type of context supporting the Chet over Victor narrative. It just shouldn't, in my opinion, because it doesn't make any sense. Like, it's not something that Victor can control. He can't control how well his teammates perform, or the fact that he's not on the team that Chet Holmgren is. And I know that Chet can't help that either, but it's not like he's really like the number one option on that team that's producing number one level numbers and like high stats, high scoring numbers, all that types of things. Like he's really efficient. I can't even lie, he's efficient, but it's like he doesn't even. He's not one of his team. I mean, the only thing that he leads his team in essentially right now, other than efficiency, is blocks. Shy leads in points and assists. Oh, and he leads in rebounds. My bad, I forgot about that. He is a center, but essentially, like he does lead in those stats, and like credits to him, obviously, because it's really difficult to lead those stats, especially as a rookie. But then again, it's like he might lead those stats like on his team, but it's not like he's the one leading his team accumulating those stats, if that makes sense. And he's also not the one leading his team, period, because Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is just so good at basketball. So with that, we are running out of time, and we are going to go into our first break, and I will see you in the next segment where we talk about Luka and Devin Booker's matchup, which happened yesterday. So I will catch you right after this break.
In the world blind, please Lord give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please Lord give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown, get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits, some losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
And we are back with the second segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Before I begin with this second segment, as always, I remind you to please remember to tip and to donate in the following link that is right below the ticker. That is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. Makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, you guys, the viewers. Once again, the link is streamelements.com/GSMC Sports Network./tip. And without further ado, let us go ahead and begin with the second segment, which will be Luka going up against Devin Booker, and Devin Booker out-dueling Luka for actually multiple times if you look at the career stats. A lot of people don't know that, though. A Suns fan, but that wasn't the big news about this game. Luka and Devin Booker actually going head-to-head. No, a Suns fan got ejected in this Mavericks game. So so the Mavs were at home. Luka had full home court advantage, and he used that to his advantage and ended up getting a Phoenix Suns fan, obviously, kicked out. So Luka shouting, he caught the fan shouting, "Luka, you tired? Get your ass on a treadmill." Quotes. Those are in quotes. Those are his words, not mine. Luka did not like those words, and moments later, you could see the fan in a clip being escorted out by security. This was the first time that security has done their job in the Mavericks arena, and it's very refreshing because if you remember about the news about the Mavericks having a child kidnapped in that stadium and later almost being sold on a black market users, now they were able to fix that and they upgraded their security, so that's always good to see. I don't understand why fans feel the need to instigate all these these types of players when they're just playing the game, especially when they paid so much money to enjoy those seats. It's like, I understand that if you're if you're rooting for the opposing team, you'd want to chant like sort of things that like affect the opposing players and like might impact their performance in the game. That 100%, it makes sense without a doubt. Fans interfering and trying to be a menace to the opposing team or its fans isn't something new, unfortunately, but that is still something that is most likely not going to change, even though like I just see no point to it, especially when you pay so much money. Like he sat, at least from the clips that I saw, he was sitting very, very close to courtside. So those tickets were not expensive at all. And he just got removed just like that for saying a few words that might not have been that hurtful in his opinion, but they were in Luka's opinion. And at least Luka let security do the work. We had our fair share of times where the NBA players tried to be security. Ron Artest, being the ringleader for Malice at the Palace, is a great example. Obviously, this wasn't the same scenario whatsoever, but the fan did say something that could technically get you canceled because that is technically body shaming, saying what he said. It's a bit weird how a comment might seem so harmless, but it ends up getting you thrown out of a game. It's also a little bit crazy to me how he was able to hear all of that with all the noise going on from the home crowd. I mean, I'd personally just stick to making noise as like an opposing fan because like they really can't do anything or like they can't really say anything like, hey, throw this fan out, he's being too loud. Like what, you're going to kick me out for being too loud? I'm supposed to be loud. I'm in an arena. That's the point. That's what I paid for. Obviously, it doesn't happen all the time. Some players take it as a joke. I remember there was a Wizards game in a warm-up. Somebody yelled at LeBron, called him a big baby. He said it loud enough so everybody in the arena could hear him because there was practically nobody in the arena, so it was like really, really quiet. All you could hear is the basketballs bouncing. And in response, LeBron started going wah, 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 playing into the baby joke. So obviously he didn't get the fan thrown out, but he played in the joke in a different way, and it's obviously like they have different star players are going to have different ways of handling a scenario. I guess that comment just really affected Luka, but who knows? Might have been because like it was in the middle of a game, and Luka did not end up winning this game. The Suns blew out the Mavericks 132 to 109. Kyrie was out this game, no surprise. He sprained his thumb, ruining what could have been a really nice matchup against the guards. Could have been Bradley Beal against Kyrie or Devin Booker against Kyrie, or it could have maybe even been like could have made a little segment where it was like the two former Brooklyn players are going head to head against each other. Like that would have been a nice little headline. Luka ended the game with 34, 9, and 8, but it wasn't enough for Devin Booker's 46 points, Bradley Beal's 20, Grayson Allen's 15, and Kevin Durant's 12. I say all of those players because not a single player on that Mavs starting lineup other than Luka was able to outscore any of those Suns players that I just mentioned. After this game, Devin Booker is now 10-3 against Luka in his career, which is honestly very impressive because the way that you'd hear about how Devin Booker and Luka Doncic match up against each other, the way that you hear it goes down and the way that you hear how it ends, you'd assume that Luka tends to have the upper hand in most of these matchups, but it turns out he ends up losing in a lot of these matchups. The same with the Clippers, actually. Like, a lot of people say that Luka owns the Clippers when every single time he ends up falling short in a series against them in the postseason. So it's like, does he really own the Clippers or does he just put up great stats against them? It's like one or the other. You can't make them both. Obviously, Kyrie not playing definitely changed the outcome of the game drastically because the Mavs need that scoring production from him. Now, Tim Hardaway wasn't as efficient at all this game. This has been the overall story for Luka and the Mavs for some time now. He always needs help on the offensive side of the ball because his defense and the team's defense overall is really bad. Allowing someone to come to your home and drop 46 points, I don't care who it is, it's unacceptable no matter how good he is offensively. Now, like, unless it's someone like Michael Jordan and like Kobe, all those type of players who are just known scorers and players who have the ball in their hands all the time and shoot the ball almost all the time, then it makes sense for them to drop all of those points because it's like they're getting all of those shots. So unless it's someone like that who's getting that many shots, and Devin Booker, if I remember correctly, he had a really efficient game this night. So I don't believe he shot the ball that much. But again, I could be wrong. I'm going to just double check real quick. He took 23 shots, which again is not like the same as MJ or Kobe standards where they take like 30 shots or even more than that. Who knows? But 23 shots and 10 of them were threes, and he made 17. He made 17 of those shots, which is not bad whatsoever. And it's not a lot of shots. I mean, it's a lot of shots, but it's not that many shots as like compared to those players. So having someone drop that many points is unacceptable, and no matter how good he is offensively, like unless he's taking the same amount of shots as like Jordan or Kobe. Kyrie played over 30 minutes in his last two games and even got one of those games postponed. More on that later. So I don't understand why he decides to take this game off. And I don't know, maybe he does just genuinely have a sprained thumb, but considering how this is Kyrie and he does look for, or he has a tendency to like sort of look for means and reasons to not play games, given his time in Brooklyn. I'm a Brooklyn Nets fan, and given his time in Brooklyn, it looked like he just did not want to play. Kyrie played. The team needed you, and I know it says that you go out with a sprained thumb, but you played 36 minutes against Boston. So how were you able to play that much against Boston a whole like several days before, but then you get a sprained thumb? It doesn't make sense, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just digressing a little bit too much. I'm not a fan of Kyrie doing this in big games because he has a tendency of doing this like all the time, or like in games that could be a lot more fun if he just played in them, especially when it's clear that Luka needs you in order for his team to be somewhat competent. Obviously, asking those two to take on the high-powered Suns and their offense is a very difficult task, even more difficult when your second option isn't there for you. This is also that Devin Booker should probably. This is also a sign that Devin Booker should probably get a little bit more All-Star votes than Austin Reeves. It still amazes me how good Devin is, and he can't get more votes than Austin Reeves, someone who literally is only popular for being a white guy and playing with LeBron. That's why Alex Caruso was popular, and that's why he's popular now. So, I mean, no disrespect to white people, obviously, but, like, I mean, that's literally the only thing that gives him notoriety on that Lakers squad. It's disrespectful to have Reeves over someone who is as good as Devin Booker. I thought Booker had a lot of fans and a good fan base to back him up in the voting, but, like, it doesn't, like, not to mention Devin Booker changing to being a point guard and still managing to be elite at that position as well. The big three and the Suns scored 78 points that last game. And in the game before that, they scored 77 points. And then in the two games before that one, they scored 91. They have been scoring on anyone as they please. Now, you might argue that these games were against teams that don't really have the best defense, the Mavs, the Bulls, the Pacers, and the Pelicans. Nonetheless, that's still a lot of points for a high-powered offense in those three games. They are one of the teams that is absolutely rolling offensively, and is absolutely rolling it in the wins category. Same with the Clippers, as I mentioned them like all the time. Those are one of the many teams that is absolutely running away with a lot of wins this season. This isn't the first time for KD to being part of an ISO-heavy team with two other guards that can score the ball a lot. The difference is that there are some bench players, but obviously like the real offense comes from those big three players. They are a threat in the West right now. They hold the 5th spot, and I feel like I've said that about like every team so far. But this is 100% true. Like I said it before, like that the Mavs held the 5th spot, and recently the Pelicans held the 5th spot, but now it's changed, and now Phoenix holds the 5th seed, and I just think it's hilarious. I feel like I talk a lot about the Clippers and how a lot of teams have the tendency to match up against them, and they might match up against them. If those two, Phoenix and the Clippers, match up against each other, I think it's going to be a very interesting series. The Clippers lost to them last year because they did not have Paul George, and because of not having Paul George, obviously one of their better players, there was a lot of offense lacking for the team, but this is going to be a little different. Not to mention, however, it might be a little different in ways that aren't beneficial for LA, considering how the Phoenix Suns got Bradley Beal in a trade. So adding Bradley Beal to the team is just adding another difficult offensive player to guard. I mean, like, who knows? They might not even need to match up against each other. They might going into next week or like in 5 days, the matchups might change already, and the Clippers might move up to like the 2nd spot, and like the Phoenix Suns might move all the way down to like, I don't know, like maybe either 9 or 10. Who knows how this season's gonna play out? But as of right now, we are running out of time for the 2nd segment, so we are going to tune back in after a short break and go into the 3rd segment, where I will update you all on the previous games that happened, as well as the Warriors starting up their season once again after the incident with their assistant head coach. So I will be right back after this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
And we are back to the 3rd segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast. As I said before, in the 2nd segment, we are going to talk about yesterday's matchups, and we are going to update you on the previous games that have recently happened. And if we have more time, we will talk about the rest of the upcoming games in the upcoming matchups that will be happening later on tonight, and the matchups that would be happening either tomorrow or Saturday or Sunday. Whichever ones, we will find out, and we shall see. So, the Warriors, as I mentioned previously, they've hosted their first home game against the Hawks after the tragedy of their assistant head coach, Dejan Milojevic, passing away. Obviously, there was a tribute before the game started for him since they were at home. This was the first game the Warriors have played after having 2 of them postponed. One of those games being against the Jazz, and the other game against the Dallas Mavericks, which I mentioned earlier because I was talking about Kyrie earlier. The Warriors were determined throughout this game. The big story being Jonathan Kuminga going 11 for 11 from the field with 25 points. He's a fan favorite, obviously. I talk a lot about fan favorites. He's one of the fan favorites on those teams, and he played well. Curry also got on the scoring board with 25, as well as Klay Thompson with 24. And even Draymond Green was getting on the scoring board with 12 points, going 5 of 6. Obviously, I'm not going to knock the Warriors for having 2 games postponed because of this, they ended up dropping really low in the standings to the point where they're not even in the play-in talks right now. They are out of the play-in. So the minute the play-in starts, their season is done, at this point at least. I'm not sure when the games are going to be made up for the Warriors this year. I'm pretty sure that they will be made up, however. It's the same how the Lakers and the Clippers game was made up after Kobe tragically passed away, God rest his soul. And not to mention, DeJounte Murray, a player famous for being in a bunch of trade rumors, led the Hawks in scoring with 23 points. Unfortunately, his other guard, Trae Young, wasn't there as he was under concussion protocol. So obviously, concussions are very serious. If you're under that protocol, you shouldn't play under any means necessary. He should protect himself. He's relatively the shortest player on the court almost every single time, so going out there with a concussion is just asking him to hurt himself. Great move that he just didn't do that. Obviously, if Trae was there, maybe the story of the game would have been a little bit different. As of right now, it seems more and more likely that I feel DeJounte Murray would be getting traded, seeing as the Hawks aren't a major threat right now with him and Trae Young in the Eastern Conference. Now, obviously, they go up against difficult competition, and that prevents them from making it into deep runs. But they need to be able to beat that competition. Otherwise, then it's you're just going in circles all the time. It's if you can't constantly beat them and feel confident that you can beat them, then what's the point? So I feel right now they should try to go for a trade and maybe rebuild. You have Trae Young still. Trae Young is a very good guard. He's competent enough to bring the team and lead the team and maybe get their record somewhat in the mid-tier area. But if he could salvage this season, that would be impressive. If not, they could always just lose a bunch of games and try to succeed in the draft. But I feel now is a good time for DeJounte Murray to consider the trade route, because it's not looking good for Atlanta. I wouldn't be surprised if they traded him right before the deadline. I mentioned before how the Bucks. Actually, no, I didn't mention before. Anyway, let me go ahead and mention it now. So the Bucks, as I mentioned before in the previous podcast, the Bucks recently fired their head coach and now have Doc Rivers as their head coach. And before the game at the pregame shoot-around, the entire group of Bucks players was all synced up doing a dance. Now, it really seemed that they didn't like their head coach whatsoever, because they did this dance, and they haven't done this dance until after the head coach was fired. So it was really funny, and I think it was a direct response of the Bucks organization finally doing the job and getting him fired. In Doc's first game with the Bucks, they ended up getting a win over the Cavs. The Cavs are a top 5 team in the East, so definitely not a team that you'd want to underestimate. This is when they aren't even fully healthy. Darius Garland still recovering from injury. Giannis Antetokounmpo ended the day with 35 points. Damian Lillard ended with 28. Chris Middleton ended with 25. This is great numbers for the 3 best players on Milwaukee, the 3 best players at least offensively. Mitchell tonight was very quiet on the offensive end, scoring 23 points on 24 shots. Obviously, this wasn't a very good night for him, not very efficient, but going against a good defensive team like the Bucks, there's not really much more you can expect from someone who takes as many shots as Mitchell does. The Bucks have shown that they have multiple offensive weapons to deal with their situation come playoff time. Having Dame on the roster definitely opens up a lot more scoring opportunities, and Giannis is already great in getting efficient shots in and arguably out of the paint. He's working on his mid-range game. He's got a little bit there, but they have a lot of weapons, and they've shown that they can utilize them very well so far. Like even though Dame didn't have the greatest like night shooting the ball like efficiency wise, he was still able to put points up on the board, and that's what you need in the end of the day from Dame. Same with Giannis Antetokounmpo. He played very dominantly as he always does, and Chris Middleton finally got in on some of the action. I don't really see him getting talked about much in terms of scoring because now it's like between Dame and Giannis, or who gets the game ball in the end. But he had a good night, so that's always good news for the Bucks. And maybe they won't include him in the trade package as they try to get DeJounte Murray. If that does happen, who knows? Maybe they'll become even better with DeJounte. They do need all the firepower that they can get because of how good Boston Celtics are and their starting five. So maybe the coaching change was for the better with the Bucks squad and they just needed a new face. Again, we will see come playoff time. I can't stress enough how scared I am for these Bucks come playoff time. And we will just see what happens. Hopefully they can get the job done, but the Pistons ended up winning another game, improving their win total to 5. I thought they would end up losing, as I mentioned in a short before, so that's why I'm including it in this segment. A lot of people feel sad for their fans because they still, for some reason, can't get more wins than the Giants. I think it's really crazy how this team still, it doesn't make any sense how, it's not the worst team to ever lace up in sneakers, but when you look at the games that they lost, it's how is that possible? Bojan led the Pistons with 34 points. There was no Cade Cunningham tonight and in this game for the Pistons, and they were still able to win, which begs the question, are the Pistons a better team without Cade on the roster? Because they have a better record without him. It's not a winning record, obviously, but they do have a better record in terms of win percentage without him on the roster than they do with him on the roster. So is he the problem to this team? Is he going to be involved in the trade? Who knows? But obviously, I'm kidding because I don't think he's going to be involved in any type of trade of that nature. But Bojan led them in points, 34. The Hornets still can't really seem to figure it out. They won against the Wolves, but now they lose to the Pistons, literally going from beating the best team in the league to losing to the worst team in the league. So it's a really bad flip-flop scenario that you got right there. On the other side with the Wolves, they ended up beating the other really bad team in the East, which is the Wizards. They showed much more maturity in this game in the blowout. The Wizards with the easy win. Anthony Edwards was the leading scorer with 38 points. Cat also ended with 27, and Rudy ended with 19. So good scoring from all three of those players, all three of those key players. Great bounce-back win after losing to Charlotte the last game and ruining Cat's 62 points. What was thought to be Jordan Poole's big pool party in Washington ends up being so bad that the team decides to completely move locations. He put up really bad 7 points for 2 for 11. For someone who is supposed to be leading and scoring, given the shots that he takes, he still took the second most shots on his team, and he had only 7 points, which is not good whatsoever. These are really bad plays that he's making on both sides of the ball, and for someone that should be scoring this much, this is just unacceptable. If he's not scoring, then he's not doing well because he gives zero effort on defense. He has no room to talk about on defense. It doesn't even look like he knows where he's at sometimes. It really highlights the difference between him and Anthony Edwards. They're relatively close in age, and Anthony Edwards has shown that he can be a leader of a team and be a reliable option and a reliable role model for a team for their fans and for any organization to work around with. Right now, it doesn't look that way for Jordan Poole. Even though Jordan Poole is the one with the ring at the end of the day, that's sort of like the only talking point that he has right now. So we still have some time, and we will see if Ant can end up getting that ring. Who knows? It might happen this year. Might happen a little bit after, because who knows if Jordan Poole's going to get a ring. But we think we still have enough time, so we can get into some more other segments. Well, not other segments. My bad. Other matchups that are going on tonight and that are going to happen, and you should be on the lookout. The Pacers are going up against the Sixers tonight. Not sure if Tyrese is going to be playing this game, but if he does, this is definitely a game to look out for. Tyrese Maxey against Tyrese Halliburton. By the way, the Tyrese that I'm mentioning that I don't know if he's going to play or not is Halliburton, because he was out for a couple of games. We'll see if Joel can keep his 30-point streak alive and continue to score 30 with ease. I have the over on Joel, so just do that for all you bettors out there. I think he will easily get over 30 points, but we shall see at the end of this game. They don't necessarily have a rim protector that I think is competent enough to stop him, so I think the matchup will go very well for Embiid. The Bulls go against the Lakers in another matchup for tonight. The Bulls are missing out on Levine while the Lakers are missing out on LeBron. So might be a bit even for the both of them. I don't really trust DeMar, however, to be one of the players to lead that team. I think Anthony Davis is going to have a strong performance in this game, and the Lakers are going to come out on top. So watch out for that game as well, because the Lakers need this win right now. They're one game below being 500, and that affects their playoff chances. And, LeBron James cannot afford to miss a playoff spot. Otherwise, the entire media is going to slander him and criticize him for absolutely no reason whatsoever. They are haters. So next, we will talk about the Celtics as they go off against the Miami Heat. Again, another big matchup. If the Heat can beat the Celtics in this matchup, then it could show that they definitely belong in the conversation for being one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference. Excuse me. Pardon me. But as I was saying, if the Heat end up winning this game against the Boston Celtics, it could put them in an argument for being one of the top teams in the Eastern Conference, considering how often they go on runs, deep playoff runs, beating high-seeded teams while being a relatively low seed themselves. So if the Heat can beat the Celtics in this matchup without having DeJounte Murray, assuming they get DeJounte Murray in a trade, I have no idea if that's happening, then they might be a very huge problem in the East. Because, again, they aren't always a high seed. So they could be in 1 through 5. They could be in 1 through 8 and nobody would be surprised. But they could also beat the 1 through 8 and nobody would be surprised. Which is a very scary team to go up against, because you have no idea which one you're going to get. So with that, we are out of time for this third segment. Now we are going to get into the fourth segment, where we're going to talk about Shaq and how he had a few words to say about Bol Bol in a recent episode of one of his podcasts. So I will go ahead and see you guys after this short break. And we are back to the fourth segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Before I begin with this fourth segment, I'd like to remind all of you guys, as always, to please remember to tip and donate. If you want to become a member of the show, or if you'd like to get your comments recognized, use the link in the ticker at the bottom of the show segment. That is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. Makes the show a lot more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Once again, that is streamelements.com/gsmcsportsnetwork./tip. And with that, we can begin with the fourth segment, which is going to focus a little bit about some of Shaq's comments regarding Bol Bol, who is one of the tall players on the Phoenix Suns. He's not Kevin Durant, but he does play power forward sometimes. He is 7'2". He's very tall, very lanky, a fan favorite. He has a similar slim build to Kevin Durant, and his play style is a little bit similar in the sense that he is a tall player who plays like a guard. Because of the play style and his height, makes him very unique, and a lot of players are drawn to that uniqueness. A lot of fans that are like hardcore basketball fans tend to call him an IRL, my career player, which is a reference to NBA 2K, where you can make your own player build in the game. And one of the popular ones you can make is a tall power forward who can do everything offensively and everything defensively, which is essentially what Victor Wembanyama and Bol Bol are, both, like, in essence. Because when you look at their player builds, like, they should be able to do everything. Because, like, you look at Bol Bol's highlight reels, you look at Victor Wembanyama's highlight reels, like, they can do everything, and you see that they can do everything. So it's almost as if, like, they're not real, which is why it's used as like a video game reference. It's a popular phrase that Victor Wembanyama sort of took to a whole different level, because now we have one of these tall alien players, one of these tall players starting for an organization and legitimately getting a bunch more minutes. Like, we usually see these tall guys, but some of these tall guys, they don't really get that much minutes when it comes to actually, like, playing a lot of these games. Like, they would get minutes, but only to, like, get praise from the fans and whatnot. Like, it would be garbage time minutes, essentially. Like, I don't want to call it garbage time, but that's, sadly, like, that's what it was. Obviously, being 7'4" and being at such a young age definitely impacts the attention you have coming from the media. And depending on the team that you get drafted to, also depends on how much media attention you get, and also how good you are. So, obviously, seeing as Victor Wembanyama was taking the league by storm, it got the attention of Shaq, who is one of the most well-respected centers in the league, top three center of all time. Obviously, Shaq has, like, he likes to have this little beef with centers where he tends to, like, comment on their game and whatnot, and, like, always brings up his rings and the fact that he has 3 of them, and whoever he's talking about most likely has less than him. Shaq on the podcast in particular, however, was targeting Bol Bol and saying that Bol Bol can do everything that Victor Wembanyama can do, but even better. Bol Bol is just lazy, is what he said. So, personally, I don't think saying that he's lazy is a good excuse for why someone can do what another player can do, if that makes sense. Like, so why doesn't he play like Victor, despite him, like, why is he lazy? Why does he choose to be lazy? It doesn't make any sense to me why a player who, if he could play better, just chooses to not play better, if that makes sense. I mean, maybe I'm just, like, talking from the viewer's perspective, because that is technically what Shaq did, considering how he didn't exercise later on in his career, but who knows. Bol Bol on Orlando, in 22 minutes of playing time that he averaged 9 points, 5 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 block on 55% shooting from the field, 27% shooting from three, and 76% shooting from the free throw line. Wemby, on the other hand, on 24 minutes, he's averaged 24 points, 9 rebounds, 3 assists, 3 blocks on 53, 33, and 84% shooting. So these, apart from field goal percentage, these are all better stats across the board for Victor Wembanyama. They heavily favor Victor, in fact. So it's almost like there's no argument for Bol Bol even being in the same conversation as Victor, just even with all of Bol Bol's experience in the NBA. Like, that's just time he spent in the league. That's not, he didn't necessarily play that many minutes while he was in the league, at least compared to Victor now, getting all the consistent minutes he has and playing behind players like that played the same position as you, like Nikola Jokic and Kevin Durant. It's obviously difficult to get a starting spot, but I mean, like, if you aren't good enough to get a starting spot, chances are, like, you're not good enough. Like, there's no way around it. If the coach doesn't think that you're good enough to start, like, you're not good enough to start. I don't understand why he's, like, pushing this narrative that they're, like, both the same. Like, I feel like it's simply because, like, they're both tall. Even though, like, they're both tall, that doesn't necessarily mean that they both play the same or they're both the same. It's not true whatsoever. I've been saying it from the beginning of my podcast and from the beginning of my YouTube lives. He is the favorite to win Rookie of the Year, so I'm obviously going to be biased for Victor, but you get minutes in the NBA for a reason. If you aren't getting minutes, it's because you aren't good enough to be playing in those minutes. So, over players that are before you, at least. So, it's just that simple. Like, you already have a tall forward, so your competition for Bol Bol is not going to be easy. Victor Wembanyama is going into a system that needed a center, so he definitely gets, like, a lot of help from getting minutes from that, seeing as they were lacking in that position relatively compared to what they're doing now with Victor. Obviously, like, I mean, the team is still lacking, so it's like, I mean, does it really matter that they got the number 1 pick? We will see in the future, depending on what they can do. If Bol Bol can do what Wemby can do, he would have done it by now. I feel like this is more of an attack on Wemby rather than giving Bol Bol his credit because he hasn't really done much. Like, there's not really much to justify Bol Bol being a like that much of a freak of nature just off of height alone. Like, he's a freak of nature just off of height, I get that, but like for NBA standards, being a freak of nature would mean like you'd have to literally like do things that like people either your height or size were unable to do. There's like a lot of what Wemby has done that a lot of people have not been able to do in the league as of right now, and he just started. So it's like a lot of people buy tickets to see him play. You can't really say the same for Bol Bol. Shaq is always tough on these centers like that. Like, you look at tall centers like Rudy Gobert, Shaq cannot stand him because, like, you know, Rudy Gobert ends up getting all the money from all these contracts, and Shaq was a better center than him, and he believes that Rudy Gobert doesn't deserve these contracts, and he deserved to have a lot more money than he did, and it's unfair, which is honestly really funny on Shaq's part because he technically, I feel like he was robbed because, like, he was a better center than Rudy Gobert. It's plain and simple. But regardless of that, he's not difficult on Giannis Antetokounmpo. He's actually really nice about him. He thinks that, like, if there was a player in the NBA that best resembled him and his playing style, Giannis would be him because of how dominant Giannis is in the game and how dominant Shaq was in his game, respectively. So it's no surprise to me why he has such big praise for the big man. And in my opinion, I actually think Giannis should be in the conversation more than Bol Bol as being a freak of nature because, like, Giannis could essentially do what Victor can do, except the shooting, which is really where Bol Bol and Victor might get some of the praise, even though Bol Bol shot like 27%, which wasn't really that good. He still was like pulling up for some like decent mid-ranges, which is like stuff that a lot of people like shooting difficult shots like that, like off the dribble, which is something that like a lot of people really like looked forward to when watching Victor. And it really makes sense because like he could just shoot over a lot of defenders. It's honestly hilarious. But he and Jokic, Giannis and Jokic are probably the only big men right now that don't necessarily have a problem with Shaq or don't see like Shaq criticizing them that often. A lot of people on social media agree that Bol Bol being in these talks makes no sense given what he's done, but at the same time, they aren't denying that Bol Bol has some game. Chet is another example of one of these crazy, like, my career players, but he definitely has a case for it. Like, he's averaging a lot better numbers than Bol Bol right now, and he's just as tall as Bol Bol. So why isn't Chet being argued in these talks? Anytime you try to compare, like, a starter to a role player in these type of talks, I feel like it's automatically disrespectful. Because you just can't really compare a starter to like a role player who doesn't get that much minutes. You can't compare what they do in a short amount of time to what someone else does in a broader, much more broad amount of time. You simply can't do that, in my opinion. It's not fair to the athletes. It's not fair to the rest of the players, and especially when like the player that's averaging more minutes is in turn averaging a lot greater numbers. Like, you can't compare those two because, like, he's averaging those minutes for a reason because he can get those numbers. You have to take that into consideration. Like, you just cannot afford to do that. If that makes, I think that makes the most amount of sense in my opinion. But like, that's just a simple respect thing for me. So. With that, we are out of time with our podcast. That is the end of the 4th segment. Thank you once again for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast. I am your host, Nelson. Keep in mind to remember to tip and donate. Definitely makes the show much more interactive between myself, the host, and you guys, the viewers. Be sure to tune in to a lot of these games that are coming in. That are going to happen tonight. The Knicks play against the Nuggets in a very highly anticipated matchup. I talked about the matchups before, but I didn't necessarily talk about that one. And the Kings look to get revenge on the Golden State Warriors as they face them in Golden State's home field. So, as I said before, keep an eye out on those games, and as always, take care.